G'day, welcome to Mark and Sam After Work. Today I want to do a video inspired a little bit by comments I got from the last video I did, which was get a grip and talking about holding your rifle correctly, contacting the body a little bit more. In both what people had said, but really following up on what I have spattered through the many videos I've done over the years of saying the same thing, which is in talking about how you sight in your rifle, how you do your load development, how you do your practice, how you do all that sort of stuff. In the basics of doing it the same way as you do your actual job, whether that's, and when I say job, whether that's a hunting rifle and that's what you're going to do with it, whether that's a competition rifle and that's what you're going to do with it. But what I'm actually talking about is, and I suppose I've set up a rifle here. This is one of my rifles that I've recombobulated into a different form to something that I commonly see, and this is where the video's going. Guys who have a rifle, they use it for hunting. Well, that's what it was bought for, and they set it up for hunting. And whether they are just at the beginning of the season and they're taking it to the range just to check the sight in, whether they have set it up and they're going out hunting with it, whether they get to or not's another thing, but that's what the design of that rifle is for. And they're doing load development or sighting or changing a scope or doing whatever it is. They're at the range and they're shooting this rifle in that format to try and set it up in some form. And this is, like I said, put together in commonly what I sort of see. Now, this one is just a 17 Hornet. So that's less likely. It's more likely the same sort of thing in a 308 or 243 or a 300 Win Mag or a 7mm Rim Mag or a 300 PRC or whatever it is. Hunting style rifle, that's its job, and at the range shooting it. And this is commonly how I'll see it being shot. Now sometimes that will be in a lead sled, or set up on a bipod like this, or set up or shooting off a rest, your front rest. You'll see them sitting on there in various forms in a very simple philosophy of two things. One is they want to make the rifle shoot by itself as much as possible, so they're trying to make it shoot without their influence so they can actually see what the rifle's doing, is one of their concepts. And they just make it a bit easier to go to the range and do that sort of stuff. The logic is that a rifle shoots differently as to how you actually use it. So if you're shooting on a bipod and when you actually use it, you shoot it offhand, or you're shooting it on a bipod and you actually shoot it off the car door or off the bonnet or whatever it is, it's a different position makes, and how the body behaves and how the rifle is held changes its point of impact. That's a fundamental thing that is, let's say 95%, I think it's more like 99.9%, but let's say 95% true. So that's the first bit. The rifle behaves differently. The other bit, which as I mentioned in the get a grip side of things, is that not only is the point of aim different, but how the rifle is designed to behave and does behave behaves, well, it's designed to use the human, to actually use it as part of the influence to absorb the shock, to absorb some of the harmonics, and changes things. So when you are actually going through, I'll go to the extreme level of when you are doing a load development, and in your load development you are trying to line up and find your nodes, and that's talking about the harmonics of that barrel. If you change things with how the rifle's gripped, you're changing those harmonics of the barrel to a lesser extent, because we are talking a barrel. But if you're absorbing vibrations in other places, that is the nature of harmonics. That can change. Although, albeit a little bit, what I'm actually saying is to do a proper load development, really you should be doing it in the format that you are shooting it. So to put it in a lead sled and do a load development, there's a whole heap of different vibrations and shock that are actually happening versus you being engaged with it. Now that doesn't mean you can't do the similar thing and engage with it in that with the help of the lead sled, and I suppose in the help of the front rest, in the help of other things. It doesn't mean that can't change to a little bit on the harmonic conversation and the shock conversation, so load development conversation. But when it comes to point of impact, well, that's quite a different thing. And I suppose to quickly go into that, what we're actually talking about is that when you pull your trigger, regardless of how everything's set up, when you pull the trigger, the rifle starts to move. Simply does. So if you are holding, I'll use this rifle here. If you are holding a rifle like this and you go to shoot it, when it goes bang, you know that it does this in the overall effect. You see it go like this afterwards. If you look at someone shooting a rifle, you'll see a little bit of a lift in it. That's because the nature of where the point of or line of force is traveling to where you're holding it, to how you hold it, all that sort of stuff. And there's various things that doesn't matter. That's not important. What you do have to understand is that same thing that you see that rifle do starts to happen instantly as the bullet starts to travel. So if you have it held and down the bench in a different format and shooting where your shoulder's pushing in a different position, all that sort of stuff, you're holding it differently, that rifle will behave differently. So your point of impact will be different. So that's in all cases with all rifles, but certainly if you're taking something that you are sitting, and I come back to where I came from, a rifle like this, let's ignore that it's a 17 Hornet, although that still is relevant. Let's go with the fact that this is probably the normal thing you're going to see. Let's say a 270 Win, it's a deer rifle, that's what it's going to go and do. It's going to be used in a stalking situation, which means that you're going to be, whether that's laying down behind a log or that's leaning up against the tree, or that's whatever that is and how it's going to be used, at the range, when you go to the range and you've got the bench in front of you, you set it up on a bipod. Now this is set up in a format that you don't see any of my rifles, like I said, different scope, different bipod. I'm not a super big fan of the Harris's. I used to use them, easy to use, don't really like some of the functions to them. But I've put this on very specifically because of what I see. When you actually shoot this, you will find that these things will tend to be on a bench. They'll be skidding backwards a little bit. The shoulder point will be in a different place. Everything is different because, like I said, from what you are actually going to use it like to what you actually shoot it like. You will find in some cases the rifles will shoot very well because the guys it works for them. Circumstance happens that way. They've learned how to shoot it on the bench like that. It works well. The big trick is, and you can do this test for yourself, is that the point of aim will probably change by up to 6 inches at 100 yards. Now, it's not generally that big. It might be as little as half an inch at 100 yards. It might be as big as 6 inches at 100 yards, like I said, and everything in between. Now, if you test that, if you go out and set it up and on the bench, that's how you do it, that works fine, and then you get exactly the same point of impact, I should say, versus your point of aim, then fine, it works fine for you. That's not always or very likely the case. In most cases, there's two things that actually happen. One is the rifle doesn't shoot as well as because they're not gripping it properly, or because it is set up for your offhand shooting and you're trying to shoot it on the bench. You're trying to make it easier for yourself, but you find it doesn't work so well on the bench because nothing's really set up, nothing's organized for that sort of stuff. The other side to it is that you sight it all in for 100 yards and then you go out and you miss that deer. And you blame the equipment, you blame the load, you blame I'm just not good enough, I didn't do well enough, that sort of stuff. And of course, there's the majority, I shouldn't say the majority, there are a lot of hunters that won't ever own up to that. There are wounded animals that disappear off into the bush and no one owns up to it, but they don't really know why. It hurts your confidence, it makes it harder for that shot. You'll start to, whether it's yanking the trigger or it's all the bad habits that come out of a lack of confidence, is certainly inspired by that sort of situation. The trick that happened there is that the actual two things, and this is the other bit I want to go into. One, the point of aim is different, or the point of impact, I should say, is different because it's shot in a different format. But almost more importantly than that is that you should be not only should be load developing, not only should be sighting in, but you should be practicing in the format that you're going to be shooting. They are different things. Yes, there's a certain amount of trigger control that you can get. There's a certain amount of being used to the recoil and bits and pieces like that. That you'll gain a certain amount of confidence there. But the truth of it is practicing as you're going to shoot it is the big key here. I've got some different rifles here to go through and explain a little bit of how it can be done. But I suppose I would start with what for all the big rifles that you see me shoot, and then generally in prone positions, because I'm extreme long range target shooting is what I do. I suppose a little bit for a living. It's what I do with my YouTube channel. It's what I do on that side of things. So that's what I'm out in the field doing all the time. But the rifle I spend most time behind, I use it for pest control. So we have Corella issues in our part of the state. So lots and lots of that versus a little bit with foxes and cats and things like that. But really, this rifle here is a little, well, it's a CZ Farmer. It's the 513. It's just a little 22 long rifle, has a 3x9 scope on it, has a little shield on the barrel here, which just is so that it can bash around the place. I use it out of the little ute all the time, but this is what I do most time with, and I shoot it offhand all the time. I practice with it all the time. Both me and Sam use it all the time. I say that because that is its job, is to, or I should say, this is the one I use the most, and I practice with it the most. As much as I'm very familiar with firearms, this is the one I practice with the most. Now, I would say to everyone, get yourself a 22 long rifle and do some shooting with it. Offhand shooting with it is great practice for everything. But in actual fact, the key of it, the fact that I can go out and do my job well in the way of the pest control side of things, is that I am practicing with it all the time. I don't try and shoot it I don't try and I suppose that's the other thing. I do have a little bipod thing. We play on the front with it, but my practice is done as I shoot. It's offhand shooting. So that's the first one I wanted to start with. And I suppose one of the ones that came to mind, and I spoke about, I mentioned the lead sled. And this here is the 505 Gibbs, which I've done a little tiny bit with. I've got to do a little bit of work with it, a little practicing with it, but it has inspired some conversations. One of them was that to do low development or that sort of stuff in a big safari rifle with a proper big hit to it can actually cause damage to the stock. It's just the lead sled doesn't let the rifle move, tends to shoot very, very differently. But I understand, or no, what I should say is what actually happens is that the wood isn't strong enough to hold all that recoil of the action trying to move backwards when it's fired, where the wood will actually fail because it doesn't have the human to push out of the road when it's got a lead sled that's stopping it from moving. But what I was about to lead into is I understand the load development, the not trying to be involved or not trying to have to deal with too much of the sort of recoil side of things. I understand the anxieties that comes out of that sort of thing and the reason people go there, but it's a mistake in multiple levels. One is, it's definitely going to shoot to a different point. So these things are largely sighted and worked out anyway, but in the way of checking all that sort of stuff, doing that sort of stuff, you've got to do it properly. You've got to do it in the format you're going to use it. So this is a safari rifle. You're going to pull it into your shoulder. You're going to step forward. You're going to sight in all the fashions that you would, as you would with, and you've been taught with your safari rifle. But I get the fact that actually, how do you know how accurate it is when you're not confident with your point of aim? Well, the way I would do it, I'm very practiced at my point of aim. Like I said, to a degree, a little bit of playing with that 22 that's caused that sort of stuff. But for people who aren't so confident with that side of things, a set of shooting sticks is probably what I would recommend. Simple system, whether it's a tripod system or just a bipod system, but being able to get on there and put that where you've got something, not to lean too heavily on, but you've got something that then gives you a stable point of aim to go through your trigger pull and do things properly. The rifle's still going to behave. As long as you're not yanking down with your front hand, it's still going to behave just like it did. So it's something that gives you a way of doing that job without the detraction of it behaving differently. And of course, you're then protecting your wood stock and you're practicing. You're learning how to hold this thing. You're setting it up so it doesn't make you anxious to pull the trigger. In large degree, when you use all these things properly and you set it up properly, they aren't actually hurting you. They're more scaring you. There's all the percussion, there's all the push, there's all that sort of things. But if you grip it properly, they aren't actually hurting. And if they are hurting you, then because you've gone too big, maybe that's exactly how you should figure it out. Do some time with it and make sure if it really is too much, then that's not the type of thing you want to use in a situation where it really matters. You can't do anything else but use it correctly. So anyway, that's enough talking about that or preaching on those lines. I started off with the lever action. I think that's these are just an awesome, the AR of the 1800s, I suppose. Awesome things to play with. I see the same sort of thing. I see these in bipods with some people shooting them. I see them shooting off bags and those sort of bits and pieces. Really, a true quintessential offhand rifle, and practicing like that is what it's about. So I suppose there's two things I'm trying to say. One is the point of aim, the harmonics of the barrel, the low development to point of aim to sighting your scope and all that sort of stuff. There is probably going to be differences in your actual, not necessarily your group size, but certainly in the behavior of everything. So your load should be set up for how you shoot it. The sight should be set up for how you shoot it. The moment you're going to another place, you're bringing in a compromise which is potentially telling you a little lie. But the bigger detail I always go to, where people always ask, well, how do you do that? How do you shoot long range so accurately? How can you point? How can you hold onto the target? How can you do these sort of bits and pieces? There's nothing special to the stuff I do at all, or to be actually the best target shooters in the world you see. The big difference they've got, the thing that everyone has that you don't, if you're asking that question, is practice. Trigger time. Time behind the butt. Actually burning powder and going and doing it. Now, obviously, I get there's expense and those sort of things are involved. And you have to do that in moderation between things. My simple answer to that is when I do set something up, whether it's 20 rounds or it's 50 rounds over a course of setting things up, that's not going fire 50 rounds in an hour, but it's enough rounds to not only have got an okay start, but to have verified that. So what I'm saying there, if you go to the range and pull the first shots on target and put two more, it's a nice little group, and you walk away, I understand it, but I understand the logic to go with that. You didn't waste the ammo, that sort of stuff. And to be truthful, if you do that every season and it works every season, then you take your your bag count, or that does the job as supposed to every time, then I'm not trying to change you at all. You got it nailed. Leave it alone. But for the rest of us, you do one shot good, you do two shots and you're going to walk away. I tend to find that it's the next shot or it's the next group that you go, oh, wait a minute, I got something to deal with here. There's a little bit of, it's not beginner's luck, obviously, but there's a little bit of sometimes it happens that way. But the big thing I try and work to is to make sure that I'm comfortable with things and not to let the mistakes, the accidental bullseye guide me down the wrong path. I want to make sure I got it covered. I don't want to do three shots at a really great group and then go out to do my job and miss. I want to make sure I've got some confidence with it. I do it, like I said, with my 22 long rifle. That's what I do a lot with. Got a few of them, practice that. That's the one I play with much. That's the most. That's the one that I use the most. That does the most work for me. But I'm in a special situation of being behind big ones all the time as well, and shooting at long range and shooting extreme long range. And in all frankness, if I get that job done in three shots out at 2 miles or whatever it is, then I'll stop there. I'm quite happy with that. I don't want to run anymore. But if it's got to do a real job, then I spend some more time with it. Which doesn't mean burn a barrel out. It doesn't mean too much. It does mean just spend more time, get more comfortable, deal with the issues, face them, deal with them, make it better, so then it'll go and do its job a lot better. Anyway, I think that's a little nutshell. I'll now pull this one back to pieces and turn it back as it's supposed to. In the things that I don't, like I said, the bipod systems, they're a great. The Harris bipod is a decent thing, easy to use, nice lockups, things, that sort of stuff. I don't like the way the legs work, and the more I got into it, the more I realised that there is some in the finer details I don't like them, but otherwise they're fine. You know, lots of finer details which are just not perfect for me. The scope setup here, I've set this up in a format that I really wouldn't use it. Way too low in my opinion, but exactly what you see in a lot of hunter guys. This just takes a dollar bill and it'll run underneath the scope there, so it just clears. But too low in all sorts of places, and in that side of things, go and have a look at my videos on scope height. and what my logic is on that side of things. I would change this quite a bit around. And like I said, this is just a little CZ, which I'd also point out. I mentioned that it's more relevant with the larger ones, and it's because of more recoil, but don't discount this is also something that is relevant even in a 22 long rifle. Even in a little tiny thing, it is relevant there depending on the details. And the simple thing for those people who are questioning that sort of stuff or doubting that sort of stuff, listen, maybe your setup works fine. Test it. Actually go through and test it. Work out how to test it. Get that point of aim. Get it right. Get it perfect in the place that you're sitting on the bench and doing it. And then make that point of aim work the same in the way you're actually going to shoot it. And if it's all the same, fine, leave it alone. But for those people who have those doubts, for those people who have missed those shots, for those people who are actually learning and moving into it, there is a whole heap of advantage out of doing it, setting it up, sighting it in, load developing it, doing it as you're going to do it. Anyway, guys, hope that made some sense. Let us know any questions, comments or thoughts down below. And otherwise, thanks for checking in on us, and we'll catch you next time.